Okay, solid. I think it's running. Hi everyone, my name is Neil. I will be giving today's auxiliary talk. It is going to be about security architecture. Real quick before I start, thank you so much to everyone that can make it today. I know, it's the middle of midterms. We've all had busy weeks, but I'm really excited to do this talk with y'all. I hope that we enjoy it, that we learn something from it. So our agenda for today, I'm going to go over a little bit of introduction, what is security architecture, kind of flesh out the concepts. Then I will go into the actual concepts of security architecture, what makes up proper, good security architecture. And then I'm going to do a little bit of a system hardening and then demo. So we're going to go over many different complex ideas today. And one thing that I do want to mention is that this whole talk is very much skimming over all of these concepts. There is just so much information in all of these different fields. I mean, really, we could make a singular lecture over each of the things that I'm just going to mouse over. So if you find interest in something, please, ask me some questions. I did a bunch of research, and feel free to go home and look it up. There's a ton of very cool things to get into. So first off, for our introduction, what is security architecture? All that security architecture is it's the design that we implement to protect our systems from attackers. Generally, when we're talking about the architecture of security, it's used in a corporate enterprise sense, but I really want to today talk about it from both this corporate industry sense and also from a personal angle. So who here, can I get a raise of hands, has a home lab? Okay, a couple of you. The goal for today's talk is to have you all inspired to go home and make a home lab yourself, even if it's something as a VM running on your desktop. Just learning how to apply all of these real industry practices on your own network is really useful. And again, I kind of mentioned this, but security architecture is a massive umbrella term. There's a ton of things. We will not be covering everything. So what is a security architecture framework? If security architecture is the design that we follow to protect our systems, we can follow a design that's pre-made like a framework, and a couple of them are SBSA, OESA, and OSA. These are frameworks that companies make for their employees or for other companies if they're security contractors that have the design and the implementation of defense. We don't need to follow these frameworks necessarily. We can create our own design from scratch. Say, if we're doing something to suit our own home systems. But following these frameworks is a really good outline because they cover a lot of use cases that we just might not think of. Why is having good security architecture important? It acts as a guideline to our system of defense. Think of it as an actual blueprint, an actual architectural blueprint. It helps us map out our action plans and our defensive implementations. So what having a good written down architecture allows us to do is we have really fast reactive measures when we get hacked or if we get hacked, and it keeps our measures that are proactive effective. This is really noticeable, especially when it comes to, again, enterprise systems. When you have an entire company with multiple people working on a singular system's defense, we want a good outline that people can follow so that when we're planning out our defense, we don't have any overlap that is unnecessary, or we don't miss any gaps in our potential defense. Another show of hands. Has anyone here taken the Security Plus or the A Plus CompTIA exam? Okay, a couple of y'all. They talk a lot about policy, and my talk will, at least for the first half, go over a significant amount of policy just because it is an important part of working in the industry. If you're sitting back thinking oh man, policy is boring, I hate policy, let me give you a little anecdote. Let me tell you why you're wrong. Back when I worked with Black Swan, and Black Swan is just a cyber solutions provider, it's kind of like CrowdStrike, but a lot smaller. A significant amount of the work that was done was by the book. We had very direct guidelines on what to do, how to approach problems, and not only did we work by the book, but the employees, I was just an intern, but the actual employees, they provided cybersecurity consulting. So they would follow all of these frameworks, or they would make these frameworks, and they would go to other companies. Let's say Arturo, he runs a mid-sized grocery chain, right? You have a bunch of employees. You want to make sure that you don't get hacked. People can steal your financial records. It's important to keep that safe. You would hire a contractor from someone like Black Swan. They would come over and they would not only write you a guideline, but also help you and train your employees to follow that. It's not the most flashy thing, but when you're actually working in cybersecurity, it's important to know all of these policies. So if the thought of like getting an internship kind of hooked you, let's move on to the introduction to security architecture, what the key concepts actually are. We're going to go over the ideas behind good security, like what makes a good security architecture. I don't necessarily want you to memorize this, but the reason that we're talking about it is so that you have a good kind of background idea behind what makes a good implementation. The first thing is the CIA triad. I'm going to mention this a ton during today's lecture because it really does act as a pillar for how we want to structure our systems. CIA has nothing to do with the actual like government agency. Instead, CIA stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. These three words are metrics for keeping information, confidential. So we want the information to be private. We want it to be safe. We want to verify the integrity of the information. So we want to make sure that nobody is tampering it without us knowing. And then despite these two measures, we still want the information to be available. We want people to be able to access whenever they need it. So we could have the best encryption in the world buried under layers and layers and layers of encryption, but we would never be able to access it. You have to be able to use the information when you need it to. So again, it really does come to a balance between these three aspects, and we're going to try and see how best we can do that. Another design implementation is defense in depth. It is modeled after the actual strategy, where in warfare you have like a staggered or a gradual line of defense, and that's exactly what it means. Defense in depth is just having multiple layers, not leaving one part of our security to one singular application or one singular metric. Let's talk about the threats that we have to defend against. And this really does depend with what kind of perspective we're looking at. If we're looking at a solely enterprise or solely industrial perspective, we have to worry about, hacktivists, cyber criminals, insider threats, disgruntled employees. There is a massive difference between working against your personal defense. If you're just thinking about your own home network, you're more likely to be targeted by someone that you killed playing Call of Duty last night and is really upset at you and wants to get back at you. Or you're part of like some mass scale cyber attack like a ransomware that's going around. When we're considering who we're defending from and what our context is, it does kind of change what policies we're going to implement. Now I'm going to move on to the actual components of security architecture. If any of y'all have questions, I know that the talk can get a little bit dry. Please just jump in, okay? This is like not that serious. I will just be yapping for a bit. Okay, I'm going to go into depth on what it looks like. So you remember the defense in depth philosophy that we just talked about? We're going to explore that a little bit by kind of talking about how all of these three or four topics that I'm going to talk about overlap in some ways. And you'll see that especially near the end of the talk, how we're talking about system hardening, and a lot of these like design philosophies come up in actual practical things that we can do. We're going to talk about networks, then like application security, access management, and then endpoint security. Starting off with network security, this is like the most immediate layer that you can think of when it comes to security, just because like that is what your network is on. It's what your system is using to communicate. Having a really good and secure network comes down to three main things. It's having an effective firewall. A firewall is kind of like a gate around your network. A really good firewall will control your incoming traffic, block whatever you don't want coming in and still allow like things that you want coming in your daily use. But a great one will block both incoming and outgoing requests. So I don't know if you guys were there for my CSG talk when I was talking about Eternal Blue, but the way that we got the reverse shell was actually an outgoing request that was unsecured. Once again, it is difficult to block all of the potential malicious traffic that you can have while also still maintaining legitimate and good communication. And it's, again, like a balance with the CIA triad. If you block everything, you'll have the most secure network in the world, but you also won't be able to use it. Next up is VPNs. VPNs just create encrypted tunnels for any data that we have in transit. This is important for secure resource transfer. We really don't want sensitive data getting caught out and in transit and being read, or if we have like a man-in-the-middle situation, our sensitive data could be replaced with malicious one. That's just where a VPN comes in. If you have an employee working from home that he's connecting to his work server and he's trying to get documents or upload documents, you really don't want that being intercepted and that turning into uploading malware. Last thing I want to talk about is network segmentation. All this is it's separating the network into like smaller segments. And what this does is it limits damage of any potential attacks. So while this tactic is it's meant for large networks, you can do a ton of things with network segmentation. You can implement like a DMZ, you can have honeypots, large networks have like intranets. There is still an application for our home systems, which I will get into right now. So I don't know if you guys know this, but I used to be a really big party guy, like crazy, I would throw ragers every single weekend. I'd have 50 to 60 people just having a great time at my place. But I had one problem. Can anyone take a guess on what my problem was? No? Go for it, Nick. No, it was, you would think, but no. It's actually network security. I would have, absolute, just the worst of the worst people, bottom of the barrel, people like Nick, coming in. Yeah, just genuine scumbags, terrible people, right? And they'd be coming into my house with who knows what's on their phone, right? And all night I'd be getting asked, hey, what's your Wi-Fi password? I need to upload, this picture. I need to do my homework. I don't want people with just who knows where they've been, absolute garbage, potentially malware on their phones, getting on the same network that, I do my banking on, that I do my taxes on. My solution to that problem is network segmentation. So we can use a VLAN to create a guest network for all of my partygoers, and that keeps it completely separate from my home network that I can use for my personal use. I can do my homework on that. And it'll be entirely separated. Another topic is while we're on VLANs, we can also create another one for our Internet of Things network. So, my smart home lights, my speaker, and my voice-activated fog machine for when I'm really going hard at those parties. Network segmentation is really cool, and it allows us to have completely separated threat vectors.
Yeah.
Yes.
Why would we want to segment Internet of Things from as a separate network?
I'm so glad you asked that, BJ. So let's say that for some reason I get some kind of malware on my home network, right? I do want to limit the damage that happens. All segmentation is about limiting the damage that an attacker would get if they did succeed in hacking me. Yeah, it's bad that they got my banking records. I'll have to fix that. But it would really suck if suddenly an attacker is just turning on and off my lights, opening my doors. That's really not ideal. It was just kind of the reason that I included it was because it was an example of segmentation for not, defending. But there is still a purpose for it. Segmenting anything, not just networks, but separating the use cases for all of your networks or services is just a good idea in general. Next, we're going to talk about application security. And what application security is it focuses on running secure software, right? Like apps, software, especially web-based software. So the three kind of big things that we want to prioritize is having a secure coding. So when we're writing anything that we are writing ourselves, we want to make sure that it's secure. Kind of like the number one thing that everyone knows about is SQL injection and having proper input validation on any outwards facing websites. So say I have a blog and I have a leave feedback here. I really want to make sure that I have good input validation on that. I do not want SQL injection performed, especially if I'm hosting that website, because that would give an attacker potentially access into my own machine or into my own network. We also want to have output encoding. Yes?
With secure coding, did you research any automated commercial tools that are used in the industry?
I did. So again, there is a ton of enterprise systems. A lot of it is automated. A lot of it is created for mass scale. I'm kind of just focusing on your own network. I'm trying to do the balance between both. But yeah, an enterprise would not necessarily have problems with SQL injection. Again, things do get missed. That's why we want to have a good security architecture. But there are, I think it's SQL Alchemy. It's just an open source kind of port of big industry's tools, and they do prevent SQL injection. Yeah, you guys should check that out if you're ever making your own website or a CTF challenge. Another thing to look out for is output encoding to stop cross-site scripting. And having good error handling. A lot of even like massive companies, I was working with Verizon a little bit ago, and one of their web pages was giving us an error, and the error was public facing. You would see exactly what was going wrong. It might seem like it's not a big deal, but giving any attacker any potential information can be a huge vulnerability, can be a huge risk, because you're giving them insight on how your code actually works. Next thing I want to talk about is web application firewalls. So we just kind of covered firewalls, but having a web app firewall is specific for that web application that I'm hosting, and it can monitor HTTP traffic. So what that allows is that it can block any malicious requests. So if I'm having that SQL injection, or if I'm having that cross-site scripting, it can just be another layer of protection. And patch management, this isn't necessarily web application, but applications in general. A lot of people, home systems or enterprises, don't update their software as much as they should. Those of you that were there for my Eternal Blue talk, if I had a Windows 7 machine running on my home network right now, it would be vulnerable, and I didn't patch it, I didn't update it, it would be vulnerable to that reverse shell that we did. Just keeping your systems updated, it's super simple, but a lot of like 0 days, if you don't do like the critical updates for those, you'll be vulnerable to them. And I don't have a fun example for any of the others that I'm talking about, but the reason that I wanted to do network segmentation, that I wanted to do such a big, like, funny little thing for it, is because when I was researching this talk and I was looking at network segmentation, it seemed like not that much information was available for making your own like home network segmentation. A lot of it, there's kind of like that stigma where, okay, well, you only really need this if you're a giant enterprise. It's not necessary. It's more trouble than it's worth. And I very much am against that, because network segmentation is like your last line of defense if someone does get into your system. I mean, it would suck if someone somehow got your Wi-Fi password, got your doesn't matter how, right? But got into your system and they're looking through all your files. It's much nicer if you have like your own kind of DMZ at home where someone can not access your internet and instead rooting around some honeypot. What I did was a super basic example, but setting up segmentation, if you're serious about like really locking down your home network, is something that you guys should take a look at. All right, we're going to talk about access management next. It's not crazy, but access management and identity in access management is just the management of permissions on your network. So it just dictates who is allowed to do what on your system. There's two things that we want to talk about, and again, those that have done Security Plus know this. It's the principle of least privilege. This is the practice of giving any user or any application the minimum rights that it needs to perform its function. So, on a system example, you don't need to run everything as admin. You don't want to sudo everything. You don't want to have your Windows machine logged in as admin all the time. And if you're talking about policy, you really don't want the intern to have company financial records. It just leaves openings for vulnerability that you shouldn't have. Another thing is multi-factor authentication. You guys know this is like 2FA or like Google Duo for UTD. It's really difficult to spoof well-implemented 2FA, which something like UTD does have. And it limits how far an attacker can get with just your credentials. If you get them stolen, it just, again, minimizes the attack surface. All right, talking about endpoints. An endpoint is just a device, like my phone, my laptop, or like a server. They're the endpoints into our network. These are like the main entryway and most targeted vector for attackers to get into our network because they are mostly unsecured. We use them daily. They have vulnerabilities inherently in them. So what can we do to prevent this? I recommend anti-malware and having some kind of antivirus. It's really important to run scans on your machine. Someone like Avi, they're using their device daily. They don't know if they have malware or not. It happens. It happens to the best of us. You download one sketchy file, you visit one sketchy website on accident, and you get some malware, and it's completely innocuous. You would have no idea. So running malware and virus scans periodically, set a date, run it every 6 months overnight. It can really help you keep safe. Now, I recommend, for our personal use, Malwarebytes. It's really cool. I've always used it. But enterprise solutions are something like Sophos, like SentinelOne. I think CrowdStrike offers like an anti-malware scan as well. And all of those like enterprise systems, they offer a ton of fancy stuff. You can do not only endpoint like security and scanning, but you can also do like a remote shutdown if there's like suspected behavior. It's really cool. But we don't need that. We're good with the open source stuff. And next thing I want to talk about is endpoint detection and response. All EDR software is it's monitoring your endpoints for suspicious behavior and quarantining the system if there is suspicious behavior. So something like Windows Defender Antivirus, it works fine enough for our own systems. And like enterprise solutions, they're massive and expensive, but for home systems, you don't really need anything. There are open source utilities like System Monitor that emulate a lot of really crazy things. Yes?
What's the difference between EDRs and traditional antivirus solutions?
I think EDRs is more like proactive. You try and get a handle on things. You know, the second that you see something, you can immediately do a quarantine or remote shutdown. Antivirus is more like long-term solution. You know, oh, hey, I should run a scan because there might be something. You know, my computer's been messing up lately, or it's been 6 months since my last scan. Speaking of endpoint security, I'm going to move on to our next topic, which is system hardening. So what is system hardening? All it really boils down to is trying to reduce your attack surface, or how many potential vulnerabilities you have, as much as possible. We really want to reduce the number of potential exploits against us. Makes sense. And it does go hand in hand with security architecture. A lot of architecture principles are just the steps to harden your system. Think of system hardening as a subset of security architecture. What we want to do is we want to design a secure system that includes having well-defended components of like our security system. So one thing that I want to talk about is like the main idea behind security hardening, and it is removing unnecessary or like underutilized software and systems or like services. So, you know, if I've, well, I'll get there in a sec. I'm going to talk about network hardening again. You'll notice that we're talking about networks again just because there's such a big attack vector or surface. Operating system hardening, and then system monitoring. These are just a couple of like specific things that I've picked out for system hardening. It could be a talk all of its own. I'm just skimming through it. So talking about network hardening, again, I have to touch on networks one more time because they're so important. Our focus when it comes to network hardening should be to only let authorized traffic into our network. Makes sense. A good way to do this is to disable unused ports. If any of y'all have like go home and do this, I really recommend it. In fact, I challenge y'all to go home and scan all of your ports. See which ones are open on your home network and look up, you know, hey, what does this port do? What does port 22 do? What does port 80 do? And you'll realize that you have a lot of just open vulnerabilities, open ports for no real reason. You know, it's not often that you guys use SMBv1 on the Windows, you know, file share network, or something like remote desktop protocol, which I'll get to in a second. Again, this goes with the CIA triad. You don't want to turn off all of your ports because then you can't do anything with your laptop. It's completely air-gapped. But by default, so many ports are open because, you know, what if a Windows user is trying to do a remote desktop protocol? Windows doesn't want to disable it by default, but it leaves a vulnerability for people like us who never really use it. And all it gives us is, you know, a potential avenue for exploit. Like I talked about in the previous section, you have to configure your firewall to allow enough usability, but also not to impact your daily operation. We can go a little bit deeper than just a firewall, you know, configuring what traffic gets through by doing TCP/IP hardening. This means that we can configure our TCP/IP stack to manage what accepted packets are allowed to do. So once a packet is actually accepted, we can change its behavior. One thing that we can do is we can disable IP source routing, which that prevents attackers from specifying what routes that their packets can take through our network. Or we can automatically drop packets that have invalid source addresses. This prevents something like a cross-site scripting attack. I mentioned remote desktop protocol just a second ago, but what RDP is it allows a user to remotely access your desktop, kind of like a reverse shell, but it's a little more than that. The reason that I mention it is because it can be such a serious attack. They get like full access to your desktop, you know, mouse control, like GUI control, everything. It's really attractive for attackers because it gives such high control, and because, again, by default, it is open on most Windows systems. So disabling it is a really smart move. Just wanted to mention that. When we're talking about operating systems, this involves actually securing like the work that happens on our machine, or like the bare metal of our machine. So just like we disabled unused ports, we can and should disable unused or unnecessary services. I know especially Windows is a big culprit of this, coming with a ton of bloat that can, like, at best, it just slows down your machine. It's not that serious. But at worst, it could provide an attack vector. You can disable these services through like your services Microsoft configs, or through through the control panel, or even you can disable the ports that services run on. And some services like SMBV1, the Eternal Blue exploit, they are just inherently insecure, and for a while they just came open on every single Windows distribution. Some other things that you should maybe consider turning off are Bluetooth, fax. Raise your hand if you've ever used a fax in your life. Okay, of course Nick has. I would turn fax off. Nick can leave it on. You can turn off remote registry. Internet Explorer, you don't think of that as a massive service, but it comes pre-installed on your laptop, and I doubt anyone in this room uses it. Again, in like an enterprise system, this is all automated. You have these group policy objects that you can quickly apply to a batch of systems, and it like mass configures any machine. But for us, just looking through it manually and kind of having a checklist of things that should be disabled, things that you want to look at, is enough. We can actually take this a step further and do kernel or low-level hardening as well. This can get a little difficult without butchering a lot of your usability, but one thing that I found that didn't seem too difficult was to do a PowerShell hardening. So you guys know like command prompt on Windows. PowerShell think of it as similar to that. What we can do is we can harden our PowerShell by stopping like unsigned scripts from running through it. It doesn't really affect our own performance, our daily lives, but if there is some script that doesn't have admin access to run, it will either request our access to it, in which case we can deny it, or we can outright, it won't run because it doesn't have admin access. And I think Windows comes with like app lock and device guard that you can like set admin rights on trusted programs yourself, but just disabling it from PowerShell is a good step. And then finally, we're going to talk about system monitoring. This has to do with implementing good logging and good detection. This is kind of a more proactive measure, but if something does go wrong or we are attacked, we want to know, exactly what went wrong and what steps we can do to fix it to make sure that that attack vector is closed for next time. Good security event logging is just having like a good idea of when the attack or how the attack occurs. A tool I've used for good like security event logging is Splunk. They have like a enterprise version. Splunk does have like a massive support for industry as well, but you can download their tools and use them for free. And all it is it's a data analytics tool, but we can backtrace how an attacker got into our system. We can see what techniques were used to get privilege escalation to pivot through our systems, and what data was eventually exfiltrated, if any. Another thing I want to talk about is file encryption. So, if you just have sensitive records like banking information or, sensitive logins just sitting in a plain text, don't do that. Encryption is really simple to do. In Windows, you can just right-click on a file, go to the properties, and encrypt it, and it makes it a lot more secure than just having sitting in plain text. And that kind of folds into password management. I didn't talk about this through the entire lecture, but I kind of wanted to. I think this is a good spot to talk about it, that any of these systems would be completely foiled by having a bad password. Have good passwords for all of your user accounts. Make sure that they're not stored in plain text, and try and have some password variety. I know it's really easy to just have one master password. I'm sure that a lot of you do that, but reusing passwords, if one gets cracked, all of them get cracked. I don't know if you guys have seen that like chart about cracking passwords, but like a 10-digit password that is just made of like lowercase letters takes about an hour to crack. I don't know how old that data was, but about an hour to crack. But a same length 10-digit password with uppercase symbols, lowercase uppercase letters, lowercase letters, symbols, and numbers can take like 5 years. So having a little bit of variety, following good password practices is really important, because that makes it a lot harder for your information to actually get stolen. Before I jump into my demo, do I have any questions? I know that was a lot, but I'm hoping that it was at least a little bit useful to y'all. Okay, perfect. I am going to jump into my demo, though, then. So, hold on, let me get all my VM spun up. Has anyone done any Wi-Fi hardening or like firewall before? Of course you have, Nick. While my VM is loading, do you mind telling me?
Yeah, so my home network,
Okay.
I implemented a service or a system called PFSense.
Okay.
That allows me to have a hardware VPN, firewall, but it's their own version of a Pi-hole,
Mm-hmm.
which is a DNS-based ad blocker.
Okay, perfect.
And I have, IoT LANs, all that jazz.
That's really cool. Yeah, so I was going to talk about this with my demo. We're going to be using FortiGuard, which is an enterprise solution to firewalls. It has a ton of like automation tools because, again, the scale is one of the biggest things that we're talking about when it comes to industry solutions. It is just a firewall at like the base of it. Some free versions are, Proxmox. He just mentioned pfSense. And also just like Windows firewall itself. It's not great. It doesn't have that much like fancy bells and whistles, but if you're just trying to configure a firewall, it does work. So I'm going to log in. I don't remember the password. I don't think that was it. Nope. Okay, perfect. So let me tell you about the architecture that we're using real quick. We've got, and I did this setup in VMware itself. I'm going to try and show y'all without messing with it, because it does get a little messed up if I edit it. Okay, perfect. 3 to 10, we don't need to worry about that, but we've got one network adapter, which is bridged, so it's working on my machine right now. It's on the same Wi-Fi, and then we've got a LAN that we're building ourselves. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to do a little bit of network segmentation like I talked about earlier. We have a WAN that is being used to create like a virtual LAN, and then we're going to have a subnet on that virtual LAN that will ideally, or hopefully, in theory, we'd be able to connect to and then monitor all traffic and set up a firewall for that machine. Now, there are some problems with that, and I'll get to that in just a second. But I want to show you guys. Can you see that okay? Can everyone see like the terminal if I'll start typing? Okay, perfect. I kind of want to show you just how we set up something like an enterprise tool like FortiGuard. So what we want to do is we want to first just start configuring the system interface. So we have these two ports that we talked about, right? The WAN and then the LAN. Let's start with editing port 1. Okay, sick. We want to set the mode to DHCP. Set our role as WAN. And you can do, fun things like set your alias. It's not necessary, but instead of port 1, we can know what port 1 means. It's WAN. And then the important part is we want to set our allow access to allow HTTP, HTTPS, so web traffic, then telnet and SSH, and then we want to be able to ping it to test if it works. And what we can do is we can just show all of those modifiers that we had. We have DHCP, allow access on ping, HTTPS, SSH, HTTP, and telnet. Alias is WAN, and role is WAN. Perfect. And just do next. Okay. Now let's edit our port 2. Let's set the mode to static because we want to configure it ourselves. Oop. We want to set our role as LAN. Set our alias, again, as LAN. Or internal. This will be our internal network. And we want to set the IP to anything. I'm going to just do 10.10.10.1.24. And then, once again, set the allow access to HTTP, HTTPS, telnet, SSH, and ping. Exact same thing. We do show, we can see that everything is configured right. So we'll end it. A couple things that we can do is show system interface, and it'll show port 1 and port 2 all configured. And if we do get system interface physical, we will get, okay, perfect. Yeah, we'll get our static IP. Now, one thing about using this tool is that it does require a license. So this is about as far as we could get. If it would run, this is perfect. This is all set up. Let me see if I can show y'all the licensing info. No, this is just the IP address. I don't remember the licensing info, the command to show it, but you'll see that we're using a free trial, and the free trial kind of stops right here. So we've set up the network. Everything is correct. If we were able to run it, if we had a license, we'd be able to just continue, and I could show you off the what the firewall actually looks like, how you configure the firewall rules. Now, fortunately, I did a little bit of homework. I was able to disable the check that looks for our license. I did it at home, and I've got. Let me pull it up real quick. But I was able to do a little bit of funny stuff and get past it on my home network. Now I had to turn off all connection to my laptop, so I can't do it while I'm doing the demo, but I did take some screenshots, and we're just gonna kind of go over that. So if I went to the IP address, it was connected properly, I would see just this kind of dashboard. And FortiGuard is kind of uncool for not letting us do the whole demo, but this is our workaround. We've got the hard configuration part done anyway. Now it's just setting up a few firewall rules. What we did is, again, we made our WLAN in our LAN, and the FortiGuard VM acts as like a DHCP so that we can connect to our subnet, and then it would work as kind of a man in the middle while also acting as a firewall. So again, with a license, we'd see something like this. We'd be able to monitor our traffic. We have network tab, security tab, status tab, and we'd be able to set up filters. So I went down here, and you can see that we have our WAN port 1, and then scrolled up, I guess it got cut out, but we'd also have our LAN port 2. And this is in our network section. We can see the different ports that we have set up and the services that it's not running because I don't have a paid version. So we cannot use HTTP or Telnet. And this is where the interesting part happens. The policy is just the set of rules that the firewall follows. And under this policy section, you see I made a firewall policy. I just named it as the internet. And we can control what happens inside of our network. So I just set up just a real quick policy, and I didn't filter anything out. All it is just a subnet that someone can connect to and go anywhere. The next step from here would be to set up a firewall that actually has strict security filters, and that would act as the firewall layering that we have. I've shown it how you guys set up FortiGuard, but this is an enterprise tool. There's a ton of different settings. It's a massive dashboard. Like I mentioned earlier, you can do this for free. You don't need to use this enterprise tool. It's just kind of cool to see how one of these works. What I would recommend is to use Proxmox for your own testing at home. If you have a home lab, I recommend Proxmox. You can use pfSense, like Nick mentioned. And if you're just interested in doing your basic firewall at home on your Windows machine, you can just use Windows firewall configuration. It's not fancy, but it does work. And I'm going to spin up a Windows VM real quick and take a look at what we can actually do with a Windows firewall. I've got some cool stuff. Before I jump into the next demo, do I have any questions on what I did? I know I went over that kind of fast. Please.
So FortiGuard is a license, so you have to pay for it?
You do, yeah.
Are there any open source or free alternatives?
Yeah, definitely. I use Proxmox for my home lab. pfSense works, and I would recommend those too just because you do have that degree of customization. But if nothing else works, you could always, if you're just interested in messing around with firewalls, use just Windows Firewall itself, which is what we're going to try out right now. Give me just 1 second, guys. This is the hard part of the talk. All of that was solid. Starting up a Windows VM, that's not gonna be easy. I need to, yeah. I heard funding requests got approved recently. Maybe I could get some of that.
Question, Neil.
Yes.
So when you're setting up HTTP, Telnet, all of those, is there another option, for .NET access? Because I know you can't access that stuff on school Wi-Fi.
When I was doing the configuration options, I did not see that.
Okay.
I don't see why, like, I guess I can see why it wouldn't be. You'd have to look into that. I don't know. You can just do like help or like show options, and it shows you the different fields that are available. I did not see a tour,
Okay.
but you could set that up. It might be a little more tricky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Leave in your laptop.
Windows VMs. I think we'll get there. It just might take a second. Couple things I did want to mention is that we did, like, I didn't mention at all different types of like endpoint hardening. There's a whole lot more than just I covered. Networks can go way deeper in hardening. OS hardening can be its own thing. You know, I did skim over like the really nitty gritty stuff where it comes to like messing around with your registers and doing like actual hardening. Again, that would be a talk on its own. But if anyone is interested, you should definitely give it a shot. Just look up like OS hardening checklists. And there are a few GitHub repositories that have like a huge list of all the tools and that you need to like take a look at, and all of the like the devices that you can mess with. Oh, let's go! Yeah. Yeah, I did not think that would happen. I'm gonna be so honest.
Oh, it's supposed to be the Windows 7 one.
I know. I should have done Windows 7, but this is Windows 10.
Neil, for the 40 firewall, what OS did you install that over when you were setting it up?
Like the FortiGate? It is just Debian based. Yeah, Debian 12, just like super basic. Which is why it ran so fast, because it was, you know, totally lightweight. It has nothing but the firewall on it. Windows will start any second now.
We're close.
Yeah, we are.
And you froze.
Yeah, it did. In the case that this doesn't work, all I was going to do, and you guys could actually do this too, I'm sure that a lot of you have Windows VMs, if not machines. You can just type Windows Firewall in like that little search bar, and it'll pull up like an application called Windows Firewall. And you have like a list of just like 3 different types, I think. You have public, private, and like general network settings. By default, like public and private are set to let any outgoing traffic through. Yes! Let me just show y'all. I'm gonna give it a second to finish booting. But you can just search up like Windows Firewall, and there's a bunch of settings that are by default on. And then you can actually look through every single port, see what's open. And you'll realize that like, wow, that's a lot of unsecured services. That's a lot of stuff just sitting open. You can also, if anyone has done port forwarding, that's also where you'd do it. You'd open up a certain specific port for both UDP and TCP, and then you would like add them to your firewall policy. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go into advanced settings. At some point, I'm going to go into my, there we go. Yes, I just need to like criticize it a little bit, and it starts working. So this is the firewall, like the Windows Firewall app. You know, I was talking about like the domain profile, the private profile, and the public. All outbound connections that do not match a rule are by default allowed. So you know we have like a specific blacklist of outbound communications, and then everything else is just allowed. I wouldn't trust, you know, just default Windows security. I would include a few more. The way that you would do that is, you know, you can take a look at all of your inbound rules. So this is your inbound traffic, and you can see that, you know, I've got some name, I've got profile, and then it's enabled, and you should be able to see, yeah, over what ports it is. This is by default. I haven't done anything to this VM. That's quite a lot of just open ports. And it's a little easier if you do like a port scan There are applications for Windows or on Linux. It's just like you can do a port scan using netstat. But let's say that I need to make a new rule. I can go over here. Then I can choose a port. So you know what? Let's do a port actually. Let's say that I want to open a port. Does anyone know what 25565 is? It's a specific port. Okay, this is where Minecraft client connections happen over. So if you're ever trying to steal someone's information through their Minecraft server, you would do it through port 25565. And this is also how you would like port forward a Minecraft server. Now let's say that I want to allow any connection over 25565 over all three, color, and then finish. I've just added a new rule to my Windows defined firewall. You would have to reload your firewall to include it, but that you can just do that by restarting your computer. But now all communications through, well, all UDP communications through 25565 are allowed. I'd have to do it again for TCP. There's also just in general, like a hardening checklist for Windows now that my VM is working. We can do, firewall configurations, we just did. The big one that we talked about is looking for Windows updates. Just checking for updates and being on top of having all critical security updates. See, I'm up to date. I'm doing good with this one. But like on your home machine, just check how long it's been since your last update. And you can do like optional security updates. A lot of them could be just, Windows trying new features for you, but some of them could be security updates that are integral to your machine's function. There is something to be said for not updating too frequently because, again, like updates, especially bigger ones, can break working processes that are like, currently working. And once again, it all comes down to that CIA triad of making sure that you are being careful and safe on your machine and also being like not limiting its functionality. Another thing that we can do is, if we just make a text file, we don't want to store our passwords in a plain text TXT file like this. In fact, you should use a password manager, but at like the next step from the utter bottom, let's see if I can do it first try. You should be able to open up file properties and set an encryption for it. It's been a while since I've used a Windows system, guys. Oh no.
Go to advanced in the bottom.
Is it here?
Maybe there, I can't remember.
I think it's in one of the advanced. Oh, okay, cool. Why can't I encrypt contents?
It only works on certain files.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think that this works only on like folders, right? You have to like
Yeah,
encrypt
so
certain
put it in a
partitions,
folder.
yeah. In that case, put this passwords in a encrypted folder or encrypted partition.
That says
Or just delete it and use an actual password manager. I recommend Bitwarden. It has not been hacked in the past like 3 or 4 years, like LastPass has. Yeah, LastPass. Another thing that we can do, actually, I completely forgot when I had Windows Firewall open, is we have these inbound rules. Well, you know what? Let's do it another way. Let's do it both ways. If you want to uninstall bloatware, add or remove programs, you'll see, again, I have not used this. It's a brand new Windows VM. Look at how much stuff is on there. Okay, that's not that much. I thought there'd be a lot more. Oh, no, it's just loading. There's more. I'm never going to use Cortana. Unfortunately, you can't just uninstall it. It'll still be on your computer even when you uninstall it. But a lot of like Windows systems come with a ton of bloatware that you definitely can get rid of. I don't know how much of an attack vector Cortana is, but every installed service can potentially be attack vector, yeah.
How do you know what you can and can't delete? Like with both like apps and also
Yeah.
And bloatware, but also like the firewall rules.
Mhm.
Like, how do you know that this isn't essential to something else?
I'm going to give you two answers. One I like a little more. One is probably a little more practical. The first one is do it and figure out. Exactly. See if it breaks anything. Just learn from experience. A little more practically, just look it up. A lot of people do have, in fact, you don't need to go one by one and uninstall all programs. They do have like PC decrapifiers or debloaters that you can run and that will automatically remove everything but the bare essentials. Same thing with like your ports. there are like just scripts that you can run that will automatically close all but the essential ports. Or you can look up, hey, what does this port do? What doesn't this port do? And figure out which one's like, oh, I might need that. Oh, I might not need that. There are like massive repositories of information on the internet about this. And I put a couple of links. I'll add a couple more when I post the slides on that like cool links page for that. But I think like the security checklist that I'm following right now, that was also on there. But what I want to uninstall is, let's see if we can find it here. Yes, perfect. Uninstall remote desktop, because it is, again, a really tasty program for people that are trying to get into your computer, simply because it allows so much of control if accessed. And it's not that secure to begin with. It can be hijacked. There have been instances where remote desktop has been compromised. I think that's everything. This might take a second, honestly.
I didn't know you could uninstall it.
Yeah, you can. I was doing it. Yeah.
You disable it.
You can disable quite a bit more than you think. You would think like, oh, Windows wouldn't allow me to, but you can, if not with scripts, then just straight into the apps and features.
I only
Yes.
think it's more recent because I've been getting sued a lot in Europe.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
I will say, after you update your Windows, check to make sure it's still uninstalled, because that
Mhm.
history of reinstalling.
Yeah, no. I'm very glad that you mentioned that, because yeah, Nick said that after Windows updates, Windows does often reinstall programs that you have deleted, just because they can. So keep an eye on that. If you've already done all of your hardening, check from time to time, make sure it's still hardened.
Sometimes you gotta go into the registry and edit some things.
Mhm.
So like Edge will just keep installing every update.
Mhm.
So you go into the registry and change it up.
Yeah, you cannot uninstall Internet Explorer or Edge from doing this. It will physically like gray out the button for you, and you will have to do regedit. Yeah. That brings me to the end of the talk. Do we have any more discussion? Any comments? Yes, please.
Sure, like Edge, can I move over there?
I think Arturo should come up here. But that's everything.
Did you
What?
come across, I know you did EDRs, but what about NDRs and XDRs?
No, I didn't.
Those applies. You didn't come across those?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. I think you agreed.
Okay, solid. Thank you guys. I will stop the recording and post it.
Yeah, so just a couple other things for your certification as well. So